Hello once again. I'm chemist John Pendleton.
Hi, John. Whoa, something's different. I feel so sensual. Oh well, let's get to it.
In the case of Genesis chapter 4, we have the story of Cain and Abel. What the reason for that story is to show us, for one, how all of humanity is divided. Because we have Abel, who came to bring an offering to God, not thinking of what he would do, but looking for some intermediary to make himself acceptable before God. He brought an animal without blemish from the flock. Cain, on the other hand, represents all the rest of humanity who says, I'm going to come to God the way that I think is best. And he brought the best of the field, which was not accepted.
And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel, he also brought the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. Now what your claim is here, John, is that Abel is the one who works to serve the Lord. He wants to do what the Lord wants. And Cain is like everyone else who just wants to do whatever he wants. But at no point in those few lines that I just read does it ever say, the Lord said, bring me a sheep as sacrifice. Nor does it even say, the Lord said, bring me a sacrifice. They both brought the Lord sacrifices because they were totally just into him. It's like a man who's in the grocery store and he sees a bouquet of flowers and he says, I'm going to get those for my girlfriend just to make her feel good. And considering that it first says what Cain brought and then it says what Abel brought, it almost sounds like Cain had the idea first. So they both give the Lord a gift from what they have available to them in their profession. Abel tends the flocks, so he gives the Lord of the flocks. Cain tends the field, so he gives the Lord of the field. And the Lord's like, yeah, Abel, you brought some sheep. We're gonna slaughter that shit. There's gonna be blood fucking everywhere. It's gonna be awesome. We're gonna have a blood kegger. Hey, you think you can get Eve to come over? I don't want this to be a fucking sausage fest. And then to Cain, he's just like, what's this, some fucking fruit? What are you, a fucking faggot? Get the fuck out of here, faggot! And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. Well, no shit. I'd be pretty wroth, too.
This is just a real simple genetical course.
Ha ha ha, genetical course. And now I'm gonna skip ahead to 12 minutes and 40-some seconds. What John says in the period of the video that I'm cutting out seems to be begging for commentary, but for how little he actually ends up saying, it's impressively long-winded and boring. For those of you who don't feel the need to expose yourself to the risk of actual literal death from boredom, here's a little summary just to satisfy your curiosity. John says that Cain married and mated with his sister, and that this was okay for thousands of years after the creation because people were created genetically perfect and could safely inbreed. The reason they stopped being able to do that, he says, is that the Earth was originally protected from UV radiation by a sphere of water around the planet, which came down in the worldwide flood. And the result of this sphere of water coming down was that we began to be exposed to UV radiation, which screwed up people's DNA more and more over time, which made us more and more susceptible to inbreeding problems. I know, it seems like it was made for me, which is why it's so impressive that he managed to make it too boring even for me. If you feel like taking it on, go for it. I'd love to see it.
Now, it's a biological fact that all humans belong to one race. But then we hear this phrase about interracial marriages. Now, again, unfortunate, that's a term that shouldn't be. And we saw in the beginning of these conferences that Darwin's original subtitle for his book, Origin of the Species by Natural Selection, was, or the preservation of the favored races. It was a book on racism. God doesn't have any favored races.
Since human evolution is never actively discussed in the book The Origin of Species, which is about natural selection on non-human species only, I'm going to have to highly doubt your claim that it's a book justifying discrimination against people based on the color of their skin. But you know what? I'll play along. Since you're saying that the word race is used in a discriminatory way, obviously it must be used in that way in the book. Let's take a look at how the word race is used in the book, and from that we should be able to discern what Charles Darwin actually meant when he used the term race. If you're correct, he will use it in the sense of black people, white people, and so on. He will not use it with plants or animals because they don't have races in the colloquial sense, and he will not use it as a synonym for variety or type. So, let's take a look. I've linked a copy of Origin of Species in the description, and I'll read a few quotes from it. By no means are these all the quotes using the term race. In fact, they're a very tiny fraction of the quotes that use that term, but they are very representative of how the word race is used throughout the book. Page 21. Nevertheless, as varieties certainly do occasionally revert in some of their characters to ancestral forms, it seems to me not improbable that if we could succeed in naturalizing or were to cultivate during many generations the several races, for instance, of the cabbage in very poor soil, in which case, however, some effect would have to be attributed to the direct action of the poor soil, that they would to a large extent or even wholly revert to the wild aboriginal stock. Which human race was cabbage a slur for in the 19th century? I bet it was carnies. Page 34. When we compare the host of agricultural, culinary, orchard, and flower garden races of plants, most useful to man at different seasons and for different purposes, or so beautiful in his eyes, we must, I think, look further than to mere variability. I knew that the Americans owned slaves, but I didn't know they planted them in their gardens to look at, and had edible varieties of them. That's horrible! Page 147. The frequent presence of 14 or even 16 tail feathers in the pouter may be considered as a variation representing the normal structure of another race, the fantail. Which human race has a fantail? Another quote from page 169. Even in so extreme a case as this, if the supply of insects were constant, and if better adapted competitors did not already exist in the country, I can see no difficulty in a race of bears being rendered, by natural selection, more and more aquatic in their structure and habits, with larger and larger mouths, till a creature was produced as monstrous as a whale. And now here is the one and only place in the entire book where human races are mentioned. Page 181. I might have adduced for the same purpose the differences between the races of man which are so strongly marked. I may add that some little light can apparently be thrown on the origin of these differences, chiefly through sexual selection of a particular kind, but without here entering on copious details, my reasoning would appear frivolous. Barely a mention, and one which you'd have to stretch pretty far to make appear racist, especially when you consider it within the context of what is being discussed. Quote from page 181, "We are profoundly ignorant of the causes producing slight and unimportant variations." Another quote soon after. A good observer also states that in cattle, susceptibility to the attacks of flies is correlated with color, as is the liability to be poisoned by certain plants, so that color would be thus subjected to the action of natural selection. So it's becoming clear what's being discussed. Darwin is attempting to explain how minor, seemingly unimportant traits can still be affected by natural selection, and he hints that the minor differences between people, such as the racial differences, could be a product of the same process. In other words, John, the fact that a book has race in the title doesn't mean it's a racist book. You know, that cover, if you pull it to the left, there's other words inside. And if you just keep pulling the pages to the left, you'll find more and more. I know it's something that you don't have much experience with, but you should really try it sometime.
Now, though it's a biological fact there's one race, spiritually there are two races. You say, well, how is that, John? The spiritual fact is that all humans are divided into two races. You say, well, how are they? Well, it depends on which way they're racing. Which way are they going? What's the difference between the two spiritual races? The direction they're racing. Then Jesus spoke again to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life.
What you guys missed and all that stuff that I cut out was all the time that John spent trying to disprove the concept of there being distinct human races. He says in God's eyes there are no races, nationalities, genders, anything. We're all equal under Christ. We're one race, we're one people. To claim that there are races is discriminatory. To claim that we're different in some fundamental way is discriminatory. So he's already established that he thinks that the concept of race is discriminatory, and then he turns around and says, oh yeah, but totally, we're the light race and you're the dark race, atheists.
Also in 2 Corinthians 6:14 it says, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Because what fellowship has righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion has light with darkness?
Yeah, don't have an interracial marriage with those nasty, darky atheists.
You see, the whole world again, remember the example I gave in the beginning about Cain and Abel? How the whole human race divides. Those who follow God's way to come before him, those who seek out their own way to live their life. There's just two. There's light and darkness. Righteousness and unrighteousness. There's just two. There's just two spiritual races.
I don't need to draw this analogy any more clearly, do I?
There is an interracial marriage that God forbids. There's 3 pending marriages. Which one does God speak against? A man that is not a Christian and a woman that is not a Christian? A man that is a Christian and the woman is a Christian? Or the man is a Christian and the woman isn't a Christian?
I like how you put the black guy as a Christian as if to say, hey, I'm not a bigot. I'm not talking about white and black people. Of course, you are a bigot, but not against black people, so I guess that's good.
Which one does God prohibit? The last one. If 2 non-Christians want to get married, fine. Better to marry than to sin and fornication. 2 Christians want to get married, and God designs that they should get married. But for a Christian to marry a person that's not a Christian, God says, do not be unequally yoked together with an unbeliever. Because what fellowship has righteousness with unrighteousness? What communion has light with darkness? That is specifically prohibited by the Lord.
You're always a dickhead, but now you're just such a dickhead. Just a big, throbbing purple dickhead.
Now, one of the things we wanted to cover, and there just was not time in our UFO conference, was the creation of angels and the fall of Lucifer. Now, I presented this a number of times. I begin it by saying what I'm going to say now. I am still learning, and I want you to feel free throughout these conferences. You've seen our website and my email, my phone number that you can call me or email me. Help me out. I want to learn.
John's current email is publicly available on his website, creationistas.com. If you happen to send John an email, I wouldn't mind to mention that I'm still waiting for a video response from him.
On the 7th day, God rested. He wasn't tired. He ceased from creating. He made everything that he wanted to create. And on the 7th day, I think he just got up in the morning and he was just admiring his creation. He says, wow, look at that beautiful sunrise. Oh, that's gorgeous. And look at those flowers. They're fantastic. So many colors and fragrances. Oh, and the birds. And look at all these things in the oceans. Wow. Some are mammals like the ocean and like the whales and the dolphins. Look at all those fish. So many colors and styles. And look at the animals on the land. And wow, the dinosaurs. Those are cool. And oh, look. There's man and woman that I made in my image and my likeness. Oh, what a wonderful creation. He was just enjoying that. He rested that day. Either there is a God or there is not a God. Both possibilities are frightening. If we're flying through space at some 10,000 miles an hour and nobody's at the steering wheel, we're in a pack of trouble.
I'm assuming you're talking about Earth orbit, in which case, it's really not like driving down the highway where you have to keep your car straight. It kind of takes care of that itself. You don't need someone at the steering wheel. What do you think's going to happen? If a deer jumps out in front of the Earth, God's going to crank on the steering wheel and drive us into the ditch?
But also too, and I think it's really the case, because God does exist, we have a real responsibility to find out what he wants and do what he says. That's really the case.
No, it seems to me that if someone somewhere wants me to do something, it's his responsibility to tell me. It's not my responsibility to figure it out. If someone commissioned a bunch of hippies to write a book for him and then went up in the clouds and stuck his thumb up his ass for 2,000 years and expects me to do something, fuck him. I'm not psychic, and I'm not going to spend my whole life trying to figure out what everyone around me wants me to do if they don't say anything. And I especially don't care about the ones who show every indication of not even existing. I'll tell you what, if God tells me what he wants instead of sending people to tell me who seem like they had their heads microwaved at birth, then okay, maybe I'll think about it.
What are the implications of the creation? One, I can believe and obey all of the Bible. I think you've seen in these conferences, and so we got 4 more to come, of how true and precise the Bible is. It really is the Word of God. You can read it, believe it, and obey it.
For the purposes of this series, all I know about the evidence for the Bible is what you tell me. And if episodes 1 through 9 of Hello, I'm a Scientist are the best evidence available for the truth of the Bible, I will have to flatly say that the Bible is false.
Since he's the creator, he's the owner, he sets the rules, he's the judge of all man. And so what I do, think, say, my motives, and my attitudes, all 5 of those areas, someday I'm going to give account to God for them. And you will too.
Who needs to waste all that money on telescreens and thought police? Just invent something about an invisible telescreen in the wall and a thought police in the grave, and they'll be double plus good until they die.
And this message of salvation, as Jesus said, what shall it profit a man if he should gain the whole world and lose his own soul? And also, what should it profit a man if he should gain the whole world and not gain another soul for Christ?
I almost can't help but admire that level of narcissism. Can you imagine actually being enough of a scumbag to go around and tell people in all seriousness that everything they earn for themselves in their life is less important than them telling people how awesome you are? And more than that, getting people to pledge their eternal allegiance to you? I'm not convinced that Jesus was actually a real person, and even if he was, he almost certainly was not as described in the Bible. But man, Jesus in the Bible is just a complete dink.
Let's be in touch. I'll try to encourage you all that I can. God bless you. We'll see you soon.
And that's it. Sorry this video wasn't longer or more interesting. For some of you, it's probably a bit refreshing, but for me, it's not quite the debut of the new look that I was hoping for. But I'm sure the next one of John's videos will be less boring, less Bible-centered. Anyway, that's it. See ya.